welcome both to those of you who were here last month when we started the series, and a particular welcome to any of you who are just joining us for today's gathering. Um, to begin with, I'd like to start with a brief period of silent meditation as a way to connect with ourselves and quiet our minds and open our hearts so as to each hopefully benefit as much as possible from our time together this morning. I'll do a brief reading to lead us into that, and then I'll ring a meditation bell and we'll sit quietly for just a couple of minutes. And in effect, what we're looking for here is something similar to what happens to a snow globe when you shake it up and then put it on a table and all those snowflakes settle down to the ground. If you're new to meditation or centering practices, you might just take a slow, intentional, deep breath into your belly once or twice. Have a sense of releasing and letting go of any unnecessary tension or holding. And after you've done that once or twice, allow your breath to become natural. And listen to these words written by the poet and writer Rosemary Watola Traumer as an invitation to move inward to a refuge of peace and rest in the midst of a complex and chaotic world. After years of seeking peace, I stop right where I am and find the peace that is already here. Notice the way peace is what holds all the tension, in the same way silence holds noise. In the same way the dark holds the sun. Right here, an infinite peace, an unwavering peace, great enough to hold all agitation, tender enough to hold even the most shattered heart. I'd like to briefly revisit what we talked about last month, so that we're in touch with it perhaps, and to refresh it a little bit. And I see it as somewhat foundational to what we'll be talking about today. One of the things that we talked about that's clearly apparent to all of us, I'm sure, at this point, is that grief is an unavoidable part of life. You might remember I quoted Queen Elizabeth, whose comment is on a monument in London to the people who died when the Twin Towers were attacked. The statement she made was simply that grief is the price we pay for love. Rather than seeing it as a problem or something that shouldn't be happening in our lives, the wisdom traditions collectively invite us to turn toward it and recognize it as a natural and important part of our lives. The Buddha talked about it in the classical discourses in this way. He said, "These 8 worldly winds, O monks, keep the world turning around. And the world turns around these 8 worldly conditions. What 8? Gain and loss, fame and disrepute, praise and blame, pleasure and pain." And while it seems quite self-evident, I think a lot of us are aware that there's a myriad of ways in which our egos, our small selves, really don't want it to be true that grief is an inherent part of life. We have very sophisticated psychological and emotional defense mechanisms that try to fend off the reality of that truth. Yeah. When we were meeting last month, I talked about the fact that from the standpoint of spiritual understanding and insight, there's 3 basic steps that we want to involve ourselves with when we explore a wise way to relate to grief. The first is to be willing to turn toward it and open into it, rather than to be aversive to it and habitually avoid and ignore it. Yeah. Certainly, we have many opportunities to avoid and ignore the emotional realities of our lives in this culture because we've raised distraction to the level of ritual, right? Particularly with the digital devices we now have available to us. Yeah. But still, the wisest amongst us turn toward the reality of grief and embrace it as an innate part of our human experience. Secondly, we want to embrace it with a spirit of what I called loving curiosity, rather than self-criticism or judgment of self or the world. And the third aspect that comes into play here has to do with something we experienced in our meeting last month, which is recognizing the way in which the grief that we all share connects us profoundly as fellow human beings. There's a way in which the grief we experience has the potential to become a gateway to compassionate connection with others. And again, I notice myself reflecting upon the authenticity and courage of what people shared when we got together last month in relation to experiences of grief. Yeah. One of the things that I want to talk about today, moving into today's material, has to do with the title I gave to today's meeting. I called it Grief as a Spiritual Teacher. Yeah. Where this title comes from is the realization that if we look at the perennial wisdom teachings across interspiritual dimensions, one of the things that we come to see is that many of them have in common an emphasis on making a choice to see our life experiences as a curriculum for spiritual awakening and spiritual maturation. You know? I remember when I was training in Nepal, my primary teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, talked about ways in which we could understand the Buddhist teachings. And he presented them in terms of what he called view, meditation, and action. And in this case, the view has to do with the basic conceptual models and maps that we use to understand the teachings in our lives. Yeah. A meditation here refers to the methods and techniques of transformation that we work with in terms of transforming our hearts, minds, and bodies in the direction of actualizing our deeper nature. Yeah. And action represented the integration of view and meditation in the way that we moved through the world. Yeah. What I want to advocate here is the title, Grief as a Spiritual Teacher, which is to say that we can choose to see the grief we experience, just as we can choose to see all of our life experiences as what Ram Dass called grist for the mill of awakening. Yeah. And this is clearly a choice that the great contemplative teachers have advocated because it's a wise choice. And when we make that choice, it actually frames our experiences in such a way that we see them and experience them as life lessons. Yeah. One of the people who understood this in a profound way, who's familiar to many of you, I suspect, was the great psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, a book that some of you may have read, I suspect, and a book that has sold over 16 million copies and been translated into over 50 languages. Right? And one of the reasons I think that happened is because of what I'm talking about right now, the way in which the book empowers people to make this choice, to learn from life, and to recognize these words of Frankl's from the book. Everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Yeah. And when we make the choice to see grief and our other life experiences as our teacher, they become just that. Yeah. Let's look at some examples. Here's one example of what I'm talking about. This is the musician Laurie Anderson talking about her experience of losing her husband, another musician, Lou Reed. She writes, the musician's husband, Velvet Underground frontman Lou Reed, died of liver disease 2.5 years ago at their home in Long Island, New York. This is what Laurie said about her experience of mourning. I got very twined up with Lou, she says. I always will be. Actually, I kind of feel like he's looking out of my eyes. It used to creep me out, but now I think, of course, you become so much a part of someone else, and they a part of you. So it's a very weird type of death of yourself. Anderson, age 68, was particularly struck by the way her husband, age 71, accepted his condition and remained happy to the end. Quote, the day before he died, we were out swimming in the pool, looking at the trees, and he was floating and saying to me, you know, I am just so susceptible to beauty. And then she goes on, I think of that every day. After Reed's death, Anderson expected to feel totally lost and directionless. But I felt the opposite, she says. Just like, boy, this is it. This is all we have, right here. So you'd better pay attention. I was not expecting that at all, this feeling of being dazzled by life. Yeah. That was a profound life lesson in and of itself. Yeah. It reminded me of a Zen saying that I have a calligraphy of on the wall just behind this computer that says in beautiful calligraphy, this is it. Yeah. So easy to forget. The beauty of this process is, though, that when we learn to turn toward grief on a regular basis and open into it and through it and embrace it with loving curiosity, it transforms our hearts and minds and the way we move through the world. There's a beautiful excerpt in Ram Dass's book, How Can I Help?, in which he describes a friend and says this, I have a friend, a chemotherapy nurse in a children's cancer ward, whose job is to pry for any available vein in an often emaciated arm to give infusions of chemicals that sometimes last as long as 12 hours and which are often quite discomforting for the child. He is probably the greatest pain giver the children meet in their stay in the hospital. Because he has worked so much with his own pain, his heart is very open. He works with his responsibilities in the hospital as a laying on of hands with love and acceptance, unquote. There is little in him that causes him to withdraw, that reinforces the painfulness of the experience for the children. He is a warm, open space which encourages them to trust whatever they feel. And it is he whom the children most often ask for at the time they are dying. Although he is the main pain giver, he is also the main love giver. Yeah. So where does this kind of understanding lead us in a wise and mature spiritual elder? Yeah. I got an email a few days ago that I shared with my Saturday morning in-person group here in Boulder. Or maybe it was my Sunday online group, or both. It was an email that Tara Brach shared on her website, and it was sent to her by a friend in relation to Joanna Macy, one of the great wise elders in the Buddhist world, who at the age of 96 is now in hospice care and approaching death. This close friend of Joanna's sent this email to Tara Brach, and you can see what happens in the life of someone like Joanna Macy, for me, a truly inspiring and remarkable person. Yeah. How she's approaching her death, even at the very end of her life of 96 years. This is what Tara's friend sent to her. Beloved friends, we are in precious days. Time has slowed down. The air has filled with the stillness of prayer as our teacher, guide, and friend, Joanna Macy, has entered her final days. She is in her home, surrounded by family, exploring in between realms. Occasionally, she dances her arms in front of her closed eyes and expresses the holy phrase, wow. Wow. The wow of life is something Joanna has facilitated for many of us. Whether it was through awakening as Gaia in human form, or breaking open to a compassion that encircles the world, or the existential relief of Rilke's words, Joanna has summoned us into many forms of wow. How fitting that this is her home base that she now returns to again and again. So yes, the air is filled with the stillness of prayer, but also her celebration. She, even now, is celebrating what it is to be alive in the world, to feel sunlight, catch bird song, look into the eyes of a loved one again and again. From my own perspective, one of the ways we can honor Joanna in these final days is to wow as much as possible. The veins of a leaf, the glowing of the moon, the generosity of a hand that reaches back for us when we reach for it. Additionally, there is a global invitation to prayer for Joanna that you are welcome to join into each day at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. Not meeting anywhere, simply through the ethers. As for me, Lydia, I have entered into a more internal place. If you reach out to me, please know that I read and appreciate all your messages, but likely won't respond for a little while. I am sitting spirit to spirit with Joanna in that holy place where we meet and commune. Till further notice, I'm hanging out there. With so much love, Lydia. So hopefully you can see what I mean when I talk about grief as a spiritual teacher. Rather than just talk about this conceptually, I'd like to do an exercise with you to help you see how grief has been and perhaps currently is a teacher in your life. And here's how I'd like to do this. It's an exercise that was developed by a wonderful Jungian psychologist and teacher, Dr. Ira Progoff, and it's called Stepping Stones. The way this essentially works is that I'm going to do a short guided meditation to bring you into a place of stillness and quiet, kind of like what we did at the beginning. And then what I'd like you to do is in your mind's eye and in your heart, I'd like you to go back to one of the earliest experiences you can remember in your life in which grief impacted you in a powerful way. You don't have to analyze this too much, and there's no right or wrong way to do it, and it doesn't have to be the absolute first time that you experienced grief, but I'd like you to go back into your early childhood and see if you can connect with a time of grief. For example, I remember when the first of my grandparents died, and I was quite young, but old enough to understand I wouldn't see them again. So when I did this exercise recently, that's what came to mind. Yeah? And then, from that point, I'd like you to take an eagle eye view of your life and move toward the present. And I'd like you to identify 6 or 7 times in your life in which grief has touched it in an impactful and important way. Now, I'd like you to do a little bit of writing with this. So if you don't have something to write with, like a notepad or a pen or an iPad, take a moment to have that available. And I'd like you to simply jot down a phrase to identify each of those events. Not a lot of writing. Like in my case, I could just say, grandma's death. All right, that's enough for me to know what I'm referring to. Yeah. And then let your mind come toward the present and mark the next one. Maybe you had a beloved dog that had to be put to sleep, okay? And you put Rover's death, right? So on and so forth. Um, the understanding here is that this is done in a spirit of discovery, so we're not looking for any correct answers. And as some of you have heard me say before, if there's a sixth grader who still lives in you and really desperately wants to do things right, just give that little being a hug and tell them not to worry, okay? Everybody have something to write with? Yeah? Okay, find that quiet, centered, meditative posture that you had a little bit ago. You can have your eyes closed if it's comfortable, or open and slightly downcast with a soft focus if you prefer. And these are words of Dr. Progoff's. He developed a series of what he called entrance meditations to help us with this process. Yeah. So let these words take you inward, and I'm going to end what I'm reading to you with the phrase, in the silence, repeated 2 times. And then I'm going to give you a period of time, not too long, about 6 or 7 minutes perhaps, to reflect on this, jot down 6 or 7 very brief phrases that capture an experience of significant grief in your life. I am sitting in quietness. The winds of my life are blowing around me and within me. But I am quiet, sitting, breathing, breathing in the quiet place. Breathing in the quiet place, my breath is steady and slow, moving in and out. Regular breathing. My breath moves at the center. Regular breathing at the center of myself. Breathing in the quiet place, centered in stillness. The ebb and flow of my breathing is a gentle ocean moving within me. My inner being lies silent as the sands, while the waves of my life, the waves of my breathing, rise and fall upon it. The great breath of all, breathing in me as I breathe it. It breathes at the center of myself. It breathes me as I breathe it. We go in and out together. In the silence. In the silence. Okay, let's bring that to a close for the moment, please. Now I'd like you to write down 2 questions. The first one is, what have I learned about myself and or the world from these experiences? What have I learned about myself and or the world from these experiences? Yeah. The second question, which overlaps with it, like a Venn diagram in a certain sense, is this question. How have I been changed as a result of these experiences? How have I been changed as a result of these experiences? Yeah. And what I'd like to do at this point is invite you to go into breakout rooms. We're going to do this. I think I'll go ahead, Georgiana, and explain this to the group since we talked about it. I'm going to put you in triads, so there'll be 3 people in a group. Actually, Georgiana's going to do that, our wonderful tech host, along with Dave and Brenda. You'll probably be in a group with 3 people. I know some people really don't like to go into these kind of breakout rooms. And if that's your situation, rest assured it won't affect your grade in any way. You have another option. If you'd rather do some journal writing during the time that we're in the breakout rooms, in response to the 2 questions I just posed, after looking at your list of grief experiences, you have that option. The way in which you would do that is simply by declining the invitation to go into the breakout room. Okay? So that means if there might be some groups with 2 people instead of 3. I think it's unlikely that 2 people will decline in the same group, but you can monitor for that, Georgiana, I believe, right?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we'll monitor for that, right? But what I'd like to do is suggest a little bit of structure here, which is this. That you each do an initial go around so that everybody gets a turn that's fairly brief, a couple of 2-3 minutes, to share a first pass at your responses to those 2 questions in relation to the grief experiences you identified. And after everybody's had an initial turn to speak, without crosstalk initially, go ahead and open it up into conversation, right, about your experiences. We'll give you a 2-minute warning before we're going to bring you back. So you'll see that on your screen, which is something we can do. And then we'll come back together as a group, right? I'll say something that you probably don't need to hear, but I like to say, which is that this is very tender and vulnerable territory. Let's recognize that. Let's recognize, too, that listening is one of the most natural and powerful bridges between formal meditative and contemplative training and what's called meditation in action. That is, moving through our lives with mindful, compassionate awareness. You know? It's a great gift to give our full attention to one another in this kind of situation. And I would encourage you to listen as much with your ears as with your heart, and to treat any sharing that you hear whatsoever with complete tenderness and care and confidentiality in whatever way you deem appropriate. Yeah. Any questions about what we're going to do here? I'm going to give you 15 minutes to do this. Again, with the 2-minute warning before we bring you out. Questions, comments, complaints? Yeah? Okay, so those of you who prefer to journal, again, just all you need to do is decline the invitation to be in the room. That's what will pop up on your screen. The rest of us will do some sharing based on these 2 questions and the reflection that we did. And after everyone has a turn, it'll open up into conversation. Okay. Let me just check in and see if everyone made it back. Take a moment and check your fingers and toes and see if everything's intact. What I'd like to do at this point is open it up for some discussion with the whole group. As some of you have heard me say on numerous other occasions, part of what I love about this kind of work is the fact that we bring a tremendous amount of wisdom and life experience to these gatherings. And there's a great deal we can learn from one another's experience. Yeah. So I'd like to open it up for any of you to share a little bit about what it was like to reflect upon your own life experience in the way that I suggested. What you noticed in response to those 2 questions that I posed, and or what it felt like to share with other people in this kind of situation about what you got in touch with. But let's start with Gail. Would you go ahead and unmute, please, Gail?
Thank you. I had the best group ever.
Wait,
I had the best group ever, and I was with Judy and Marjorie, and I feel like I just had the most beautiful time with 2, I'll just say, like, sisters that, when you feel like you're with people that it's important that you trust them, and because they have experience, wise experience, and you're not pouring your heart out to people that are like not going to get it or have the tools to deal with it. So I really appreciated them as solid people. I really appreciated that. And Judy even recommended a book that I know I'm going to buy to be prepared for future loss, Bearing the Unbearable. And as soon as we finish with this webinar, I'm going to go buy it, because I really felt like we were like in a little support group. And when we each bared our souls in our own way, this is tremendous learning. And there's no substitute for being an elder. There's just no substitute for that. And that's all I wanted to add. I told them how emotionally immature I was for so many years, decades, and I didn't have tools. And it's too bad. I think it's nice to have tools. And my meditation group really, really helps me now with knowing that nothing is going to last, including us. So that's very helpful. But Judy and Marjorie really, really helped me a lot here. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Let's go ahead with Patricia.
When I was in my early 40s, I did the Pro-Golf weekend retreat. And of course, now I'm in my 70s. And so I was, I thought about the course as far as up to the point that I was at that point in my life. And so to have this opportunity to continue it, so to speak, obviously, then it really was helpful to me.
Great.
To see what had happened in the third, even though I went back on my losses, there was a dividing point, of course, to where I had losses since then, and how I had learned as a whole when I could look at that whole picture. So thank you.
Mm. I was in my late 20s when I went to Progoff's workshops. So I can relate. I love that you made that the circle came back around for you.
And you don't hear about him very much anymore. So, or at least I don't in my circles. I sometimes mention it to people that I'm I'm a spiritual director, but
Hmm.
it's not as prominent with the retreats and stuff now.
Agreed. Maureen, would you unmute, please?
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you. I got the most benefit. Our first class last month was tremendously helpful.
Hmm.
That I learned to confront my grief with compassion. I've been sharing that with lots of other people who I know are grieving. But today's session, I got the most benefit out of when we all, or three of the four of us at least, acknowledged the grief we're experiencing about our country. It's just really an existential crisis of the first order, and it pales in everything else pales in comparison to that grief. I'm actually going to leave the country, and I served 20 years in the military and can't quite grasp, it's like a daily death. And I needed to say this out loud. It's the reason I came here. And I was really grateful that a couple of other people were able to say so also. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Carol, please go ahead.
Thanks. I was interested in the exercise in that as I looked through the things that I had grieved over the years, most of them are related to a sense of unjustness in the world. I'm a product of the 60s. I'm a product of this women's movement, of the civil rights movement. I moved to be a professor in Florida for 4 years in Central Florida. I was so upset my second year there on a spiritual level about the amount of oppression in Florida based on the historic enslavement of people. I finally wrote a statement. I've decided that any culture that bases its economic system on the enslavement of others loses part of its soul, and that soullessness is passed on from generation to generation and becomes a way of being. And I literally was so depressed. I'd teach all week and then I'd come home and cry all weekend. I was clinically depressed. I was grieving. I was grieving for our insanity about how we treat each other. But as some of you know, my grief has now shifted to a very personal grief because my beautiful husband of 34 years just died within 5 weeks of AML diagnosis. For those of you who don't know that form of leukemia, it's kills all of your red and white blood cells. And they have some treatments that temporarily help you recover, but it doesn't last. So I live in Washington and we have death with dignity here, and he chose that way of ending his life, and it was beautiful, and he was ready, and it was very dignified. And we celebrated him in wonderful ways. So I'm so grateful that I now have that experience, and I'm humbled by it. And I'm also laughing because I love irony at the temerity that I had to ever think I could teach a class on grief in my church, which I did a lot of years ago. And I realized how little I really understood it at that point. So thanks for doing this class, David. Perfectly timed for me.
You're welcome. Chris, please go ahead.
In our group, we talked, one of the things that I discovered and shared was how for the first 40 some years of my life, I really tried avoiding any intense feelings through a lot of distraction and self-medication. And how once I was able to finally name those feelings and have the courage to navigate them, I understood so many of the earlier experiences as grief, even though that never had a name. You know, I was in years of therapy and no one ever used the word grief to explain, dramatic shifts in friendships when, my girlfriends would get married or when I got married, how dramatically that changed things. And I never understood that as an experience of grief until much later. So just the mysteriousness of it and how with each loss, there's just a different aspect and nuance to it, even in the anticipatory grief that I've experienced in walking with both my parents at the end of their lives. And we talked a little bit about, feeling permission to feel joy and gratitude for a life well lived, and feeling subject to cultural expectations of what grieving should look like as a daughter or a sister or a friend. So it was very profound sharing. Thank you for offering this class.
You're welcome. That's very helpful to hear. Maureen, would you go ahead and unmute?
David, I wonder if you would comment on this idea of loss, each loss as practice for death.
Well, I think you just said it quite wisely and accurately. I think prior to actual physical death, there are many kinds of ego deaths that occur in all of our lives. Some of them have to do with physical losses and disabilities, things that we used to be able to do that we can no longer do. I remember feeling that when I was 52. I'm now 75. I'd been athletic, pretty highly athletic throughout my life. And the cartilage in my knees had worn down to the point where I had to stop running in the mountains, which was a morning practice that really made my day, living in a place like Colorado. Yeah. And that was one example where my self-image had always been one of being very able-bodied. I'd been a yoga teacher in my early 20s. I'd participated in team sports at certain points along the way. And a lot of my self-esteem was built around athletic achievement at times, right? So when I was told I had to stop running, there was a certain sense of loss. And my image of myself was really wounded in a certain way, right? That was a kind of ego death, particularly if we define the ego the way Ram Dass did, which is who I think I am and how I think it all is, right? And anytime there's a significant shift in that dimension of our understanding, who I think I am and how I think it all is, there's a sense of loss and grief, which is a kind of ego death, right? If we can experience those ego deaths with conscious awareness and compassion, we begin to gain some deep spiritual insight into what is dying and what isn't. Whether we call that our soul or spirit or true nature or Buddha nature or Christ consciousness. So The ego deaths are taking place on the one level of our being that in spiritual teachings is called the relative level. That's the level of our physical body and our personality. And there's another dimension of us that isn't dying, that isn't even changing, that we would traditionally call soul in Abrahamic tradition. In Buddhism, we call it Buddha nature. The Buddha called it the deathless dimension of our experience. Yeah. So when we have these let's call them little deaths leading up to the big death, when this physical body dies, they can become part of this curriculum we're talking about, because we can learn to understand that they're a part of every human life, and yet they're not the whole story, so to speak. All right? They can be an invitation to see our deeper nature at the same time that we don't deny the difficulties on the relative level of our personality and our body. Yeah. I don't know if that speaks to what you're asking, Maureen, but you tell me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, I'm struggling with the enormity of the grief around loss of democracy, right? Loss of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm struggling with that. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm struggling to find how that's an invitation for me to, I mean, I'm almost there, I guess. It's not a death,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess it's an ego death of who I thought I was and
Mm-hmm.
how I thought it all is
Yes.
is obliterated.
Yes. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
you know, and you mentioned Man's Search for Meaning, which I have read,
Mm-hmm.
as a way to recover from military trauma of my career. I left suicidal with PTSD, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, the first thing the psychologist said to me was to read that book, and I could only listen to it on tape. I couldn't read at the point.
Mm-hmm.
So if those people can find purpose
Mm-hmm.
witnessing what they witnessed, there must be a path forward. And I'm really, it's like I'm trying to climb that ladder.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's helpful to hear what you said. I took notes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mentioned Joanna Macy earlier in the story I shared as she's approaching the end of her life. Let me read you something Joanna said that I didn't include in my talk earlier that might help us think about this. Okay. This is what she wrote. This is a dark time filled with suffering and uncertainty. Like living cells in a larger body, it is natural that we feel the trauma of our world. So don't be afraid of the anguish you feel, or the anger, or the fear, because these responses arise from the depth of your caring and the truth of your interconnectedness with all beings. So in terms of what you're saying, Maureen, it's really important that you realize that you're not alone, and that millions and millions of people around this country and the world are struggling with grief of the kind you're describing. And what we see here is the juxtaposition of what I call the unique and the universal. Because on one level, each of us is a unique person, and we have a unique personal experience that only we are having. And on another level, if you know grief and fear and upset about the state of the world right now, and I also know that, we can connect because we're being reminded of our interconnectedness. Yeah. And sometimes, as I talked about last month, when our hearts break, one of two things can happen. They can contract and shut down, or they can break open to a place of wider love and care and compassion. And so the task I see for all of us, Maureen, is to go in that second direction as our hearts are breaking. Yeah, okay. Any other comments or questions as we approach wrapping up? I know that we could probably go another 6 hours if we had the opportunity, especially if we had some good espresso or something of that sort. Right? And yet, as I said when we met last time, I just appreciate so deeply your bravery and your willingness to come here and look at what's going on in your heart and my heart and all of our hearts in relation to the realities of what's happening on our planet and in our country and in our individual lives as well. Whatever we can do to find our way through this current collective predicament will benefit from us having open hearts and quiet minds. And as I think of Reb Zalman at a moment like this, because if there were ever a time when elder wisdom felt needed on this planet, I would say for me, this is it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I thank God on a regular basis for the blessing of having him in my life and many of our lives to help us understand that we all have the capacity for developing the wisdom of an elder. Yeah. So I'll close my comments, since we're near the end of our time, with a short benediction of a sort that a friend and colleague of mine, Kathleen McTeague, wrote when we were graduate students in the Graduate Theological Union out in Berkeley in the mid-1980s. This is what she wrote. May the light around us guide our footsteps and hold us fast to the highest vision we seek. May the darkness around us nurture our dreams and give us rest so that we may give ourselves to the work of the world. Let us seek to remember the wholeness of our lives, the weaving of light and shadow in this great and astonishing dance in which we move. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all for being here today, and I'm already looking forward to next month with you.
David, thank you so much for the generosity of your spirit and the generosity for sharing your insight with us all today. We are a community, and we're here to learn. We're here to also be together. And just thank you from all of us, and from all of us at Saging International for you hosting this program. A couple of short announcements regarding future programs, if I may. Coming attractions. I love it. Can I get some popcorn? So the first thing that's coming up very soon, we have a gathering in Loveland, Colorado, which is from August 13th to the 17th, and it will be a wonderful opportunity for connection, conversation in community. David will be one of the facilitators in that session, and we have a number of people who have all volunteered their time, their spirit, and their energy for something which will be an outstanding get-together. We haven't, as an organization, gotten together in person since 2018, and so this would be the first time that many of us will get to see each other from the neck down, because we have done everything else on Zoom. Could you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. Another workshop that's coming up is Facing Our Mortality. This is one that I personally have already signed up for. Ruby and Sandy have run this before. It's an exceptional experience in terms of what mortality really is and how a year in life can possibly change us and change our view about mortality. On behalf of David and all of your friends at Saging International, have a wonderful rest of the day. I cannot believe how fast this 90 minutes went. It feels like it just flew by in a heartbeat. So have a good one. I will be the event host for the next time. Have a great rest of the week. Take care now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.